Hello, welcome back to the StitchWitch Podcast. I'm your host, Ourielle, and today I am having a bad hair day. So we are gonna have all of the Disney sea friends on my head. Yes, I purchased this at the Hawaiian resort at Disney World a few years ago, and I thought it was too cute to pass up. I didn't really think about like how practical a headband of Funny Friends would be, but here we are. I don't regret the purchase at all, and if I ever go back to the parks, I will have a set of ears, multiple ears actually, 5 sets of ears to to wear with me. But until then, I had to make this purchase worth it. So today we're going to be talking about mistakes that I am making and have made, and hopefully I don't make again, but I feel like, you know, you only know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. But these are my bad fibercraft habits, and if you do any of these, maybe you can feel less alone, and if you don't do any of these, maybe you can feel a little bit better about yourself that you are skipping out on some of these easy mistakes. So let's jump into it. The whole point of this video is just to have a little bit of a laugh. I'm not pointing fingers or blaming anyone for making these mistakes. I don't even blame myself for making these mistakes. I am a beginner. You may be like a regular knitter. You may be an experienced knitter, but all of us like are prone to our own little quirks. This is really just for fun, and ideally, you know, identifying these mistakes can help me streamline my behavior, save some money, you know, make myself happier, reduce my stress, and more than anything, I think it'll just kind of be a nice reminder of where I am right now. So let's get into it. The first thing that I feel like I have to mention is that I'm not wearing a hand-knitted sweater. This is a commercial sweater, but it is the inspiration for a great Noro piece that I hope I can make in my lifetime. This is a huge, like, oversized sweater. It's ginormous. I feel like this is going to be $200 worth of yarn alone, but if I can recreate something like this, I will be so happy. If you guys have any recommendations of what yarn I should use to recreate like a color faded piece like this, let me know. I love Noro. I'm like partial to Noro, and I believe this resembles a broken rib pattern, so one day I will create myself the ultimate cozy at-home sweater. But yeah, that day is not today. Okay, let's start with, this is all like in completely random order. The first bad habit that I have is that I tend to choose ease of creation over the finished product itself. Now, I have a friend who is the exact opposite of this. Like, she is someone who will be like, I want to make this thing, and I don't care what skills are required to get from point A to point Z. I will figure it out. I'll find a way. Where there's a will, there's a way is like her slogan for tackling challenging things in her life. And I feel like I am a little bit of a wuss in the opposite direction. And for me, it's more like, if there is a will, there's a way, but it's not my way and it's not my will. Like, I would rather do something simple and quick rather than tackle a challenge. And I'll show you a case in point. I think like when the challenge arises, I can do it, but it's just not my first instinct, which is why I feel like it's a mistake. Because if you just can't rise to the challenge, then it's just like too hard for you. It's too far, and it's not like reasonable, and therefore I wouldn't call it a mistake. I would just call it like something you can't do. But for me, I feel like I tend to take the easy way out. And so this is an example of a project bag that I made because I didn't want to learn how to knit a bag. I just figured I would just crochet a bag, and there were some parts that, like, while I was reading the pattern, I knew I wouldn't like, and I figured I should modify it, and I never did anyway. I just figured it is easier to not modify a pattern and just do the pattern as it is written, and then like deal with it afterwards. Except when you felt a project, it's not easier to deal with it afterwards. It's actually much harder to deal with it afterwards, and I should have just modified it. But in any case, I made this crochet bag. It was fine. I knew that the strap was too long when I was making it. I knew that, you know, the way that I joined the yarn was incorrect, and I didn't do anything about it. However, push came to shove, I wanted to make myself a bag, or make my friend a bag for a gift. And I got it together to not only learn how to knit a bag, but I also learned how to do like a double folded edge. I learned how to do an I-cord for the first time. I learned how to do a circular decrease to make like a base. And I learned how to, you know, change colors and all that jazz. So this is just something I put off for longer than I needed to. I could have just learned how to do this here. And it wasn't anything so difficult that I wouldn't have been able to do it. But it was one of those things that, like, because I chose the shortcut, I ended up doing an easier project that I didn't need to do because it didn't test my skills at all. Like, it wasn't, I guess, like, if you're practicing a skill that you're rusty on, I wouldn't call that a waste, but I knew how to do all these things. And like, I didn't really want the finished object anyway. It was just kind of like between a harder project and an easier project. I'll just choose an easier project if it means I won't struggle as much. But whenever I do a harder project, whenever I feel like I'm tackling something a little bit more challenging, a little bit outside of my comfort zone, I always feel better. And it's never like you know, I won't take on a project that I can't do. There are plenty of patterns that I buy and I look at the pattern, I'm like, okay, this is actually over my head. And then there are a lot of patterns that I feel like if I actually just sat down and tried it, instead of just reading quickly and deciding it's too hard, I would actually be able to do it. So that's definitely like a bad habit, or like a guilty, not pleasure, but it's something that I do where I just try to choose the easiest way out of a scenario, and I don't really consider whether the finished object is something that I actually will treasure. I will often just make something because it's the faster, easier thing, or it's the thing that I have the yarn for, but will I actually treasure the final piece? I don't know. That's kind of like in line with the next one, which is that I often feel like, it's fine, I'll just do the basic technique. So a really easy version of this is different cast on and bind off methods. I am really bad about like bothering to learn the different finishings and the different cast ons, because obviously like sometimes you need to do like 3 needle bind off, or you need to do like an Italian bind off, or you need to bind off like with this surprisingly stretchy cast off or whatever. And I sometimes will do what's expected of me. Like if it says like you need to do like a surprisingly stretchy bind off, then you know, I'll do it. But if it says you can do standard or you can do, you know, Italian, I will always do standard. That is a bad habit, because I do feel like it affects your final garment, but it doesn't affect your final garment enough. So for example, I made my first button placket, and there were 2 things wrong with the fact that I had a button band situation. One was that I had an incorrect stitch count, and 2 was that the buttons that I wanted to use were different from the buttons that the pattern designer wanted to use, or wanted me to use, and so I couldn't really understand how to modify the numbers in the pattern to line up with the numbers that I had. So I ended up just going online and looking up tutorial for buttonholes, and then I tried, you know, like a reinforced buttonhole, and I couldn't manage to figure out the numbers properly because like you had to increase and decrease, and so I couldn't figure out the math, and I just did the one where you cast off and then you cast on, and it's like a one row buttonhole, you know, situation closure, and it looks messy, and people always say that it's like the least strong, least sturdy, it's, you know, not great, and you know that it's gonna fall apart in a few wears or a few washes, and in a few years, like you're gonna need to do something about the buttonhole. And I just figured it's fine. It's my first vest, and it's my first buttonhole, and I don't care. I don't want to spend another night on this, and I just did the casual buttonhole. And I like the garment, it's fine. I like, as of now, obviously it works really well, but in a year's time, maybe it'll fall apart, maybe it won't be practical anymore. And like, I didn't want to learn. I didn't want to figure out the math. I didn't understand like the stitch counts. I could have done it on a scrap piece of yarn. I could have, like, I really could have gone in and like spent another week really figuring it out, but I didn't want to do that. And I don't even regret not wanting to do it, but I do recognize that it is like a bad habit that I have. Like, I don't really always want to learn the harder technique. This is like a twofer as well. Buying yarn without knowing what to do with it, and also not even understanding how to impulse buy yarn properly. I think there are plenty of people who, sorry, I have probably mohair stuck on my nose, which is just like a forever thing, I guess, for knitters, but this sweater does have mohair in it, and it is just like flaking off all over. But yeah, one of the common things that I hear people talk about is like, I picked up a sweater's quantity of yarn, or like I picked up just like a tank top quantity of this, you know, such and such yarn. And I think like, what's her name? California Knits, or California Knit California. She recently, Leslie, I think she talked about like what you can do to kind of make your own sweater, t-shirt, tank top, scarf kind of template, so that way you know how much yarn you need for all the different categories of stuff you like. So for instance, like from fingering to bulky, and then all the different garments, kind of like the Lions brand chart that they have in generic, you know, stores. But basically having your own perfect numbers for what you on average tend to need for your projects. And I just am not someone who has knit enough to accurately like assess. So I have tried to do this. I've tried to purchase yarns that I've liked in quantities that I think would be useful. So I'll buy like an amount that I think a t-shirt would be, and then I go home and turns out like that was wrong, or like the gauge is not correct, and just like not having a good feel. Like another thing that I don't have a good feel on is how to judge yarns online versus in person. Like I frequently find that I will buy yarns online and they come in and they're like a color that I don't expect, or their online like weight was different from what it actually is. Like it'll say DK, but it actually feels like a sport, or it says sport, but it actually feels like a worsted. Like there are all kinds of situations where I find that like with yarn weight, like it is just hard. Like Aran weight is frequently like bulky, or it's actually worsted, and the worsted is sometimes actually DK. It is just like a whole spectrum. And I think this is not like a me thing. Like I believe a lot of people have the situation, because I frequently watch podcasts where people will say, I ordered in this yarn for this sweater or this project, and you know, it didn't end up being exactly what I thought it was. So I don't feel like I'm like a stupid outlier who's doing this wrong. I just think that it must be hard to one, like transfer the photos to be realistic. There must be something about like the photography that is hard. And I guess like generally I don't feel like I'm someone who's picky about color, but when you are expecting one thing and you get another, I guess then you can start to be pickier than normal. Another thing is like weight, I think is just subjective. I think there is something called like scrum, or there's something about like the weight that you can measure. And I think that comes with experience and kind of like knowing what to do. And the other piece is that like when you kind of do this more and more often, I guess you can kind of get a feel for what brands do what. So like this brand tends to run thin, and then this brand tends to run thick, and this brand's photos like always tend to be desaturated. And that's something that I really started to pay attention to once I bought more Noro yarn, which is one of those things where I feel like the saturation is never represented right. It's either much more saturated in person or much less saturated in person. And like that's something that I now know that I need to do my homework on. But for other brands, I'm not as familiar because I haven't bought that much yarn online. And then speaking of things online, when I buy patterns online, I often feel like I don't know what's expected in the pattern. I think there are some brands and some designers who are really great, and they talk about like the skills that are required for the project. So it'll say like in this project, you'll need to know how to do, you know, like double knit button band, you'll need to know how to do I-cord bind off, and you need to know how to do Italian cast off, and you know, such and such like list of techniques, just so you kind of have a feel. Other designers do like a difficulty scale where it's like 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5. Some of them will just kind of be more vague. And I find that the thing that's hard for me about pattern buying is oftentimes I buy a yarn and then I want to buy a pattern that works for the yarn. And then I go to buy the pattern and then actually something in the pattern was not disclosed, or like I was looking for something and it wasn't there. For example, maybe I'm looking for a charted pattern and I buy a pattern and then it ends up being, you know, written only, and that's not what I wanted. Or maybe I buy this pattern and then like the gauge didn't work out, but I couldn't see the gauge in the pattern preview. So those are things sometimes that are frustrating because like you kind of expect that what you see is going to be like used, but sometimes I can't. And sometimes it's vice versa. Like I buy a pattern and I, you know, try to look at my stash for yarn thinking that I have a good fit. But then when I actually like go to start swatching, I realize that like nothing I have works. And again, I think this is like an issue of experience. It also might just be like the universal knitter's attitude. Like I don't know if this is just like something that happens, but sometimes you buy the materials and you buy the instructions and like they don't line up and one of them ends up being a waste. Luckily for us, Ravelry is a great place to store all your patterns. So I have a ton of patterns that I've purchased that I could just use in the future, I guess, because I didn't have the right yarn, or it didn't hit gauge, or I couldn't do the skills because it wasn't mentioned in the description box or whatever. But yeah, sometimes I buy these patterns with a commitment to learn and they don't work. Sometimes I buy patterns because I think they're cute and I don't have a commitment to learn, and that's also a mistake, but it is what it is. Another poor habit that I have, and this is one that I probably should fix immediately, and that is poor storage of my materials. And therefore, like maybe not being able to know what I have all the time, and also probably neglecting some of my stuff. My silver lining in this is that I haven't knit for that long, so I haven't hit like a year mark or anything like that. So in terms of like being able to like go through my yarn and like touch it, and you know, I don't have so big of a stash that I don't know like what I have, and like stuff has just been like languishing. I know there are people who have like bins in the attic, right? And like they are there for years. So it's not that kind of situation, but it is one where I have yarn in the bedroom, and then I have yarn in the living room, then I have yarn, you know, by my desk, and I have yarn wherever I'm sitting right now, and I have yarn in tote bags, and I have yarn in projects. And then some projects have been UFOs for a really long time, but I don't know, you know, exactly where they are or how much yardage there is, or if I actually needed to frog something and I forgot to, right? So the poor storage definitely, I think, will become a problem in the future if I don't get a grip on it soon. I only can say that hopefully the stash busting spring will be good for me. That's the only thing I can say for now, because a lot of this yarn is kind of sitting in piles because in my head, the piles are already organized. Like, so this is the pile of stock yarn, and like this is the pile of yarn that I'm trying to bust for the first season. And then this is the yarn that was assigned to projects, but the projects didn't end up working out. So we're kind of pulling into them as necessary. And this is a pile of yarn that I bought when I didn't understand weight. And so I have like kind of odds and ends here. But in terms of like, is it ideal? No, it's definitely a mistake. I definitely should have a better system, whether it is stackable plastic bins, whether it is plastic bags, you know, whether I have them in like wicker baskets, like whatever. I feel like I do need a system. I just don't have one right now. Another one that I have is that I am very influenced by cuteness. clearly, I tend to buy yarns or like hoard yarns, especially like if they're in person and it's hard to get to a store, which is frequently the case. There are not as many local yarn stores as you may think. And so sometimes when I pass one by and there's like an amazing sale or there's a color that's really, really hard to find, like I find that pinks often are hard to find. Like there's a lot of pink in the world. People like pink, but a lot of the pinks tend to be like rosy taupes or mauve, like blushy neutral pink, lipstick pink. It's all pink that is cute as like accessory pinks, but for me, when I wear them, they tend to wash me out. So it's hard for me to find like the kind of pink that I like in stores. So that's the kind of thing where if I see it, I'll buy it, and then I buy the wrong amount and it doesn't end up being useful for anything. And then yeah, I have like this random like quantity of yarn that I thought would be good for a project, but it's not good for a project. Like that's just like my situation all the time. Like I just feel like if you give me something in person and there's like more than one incentive to say yes, it's really hard to say no. Like if the price is good and the color is good and the material is good and it's hard to get back to this place, like how are you gonna say no? And then I end up with like this big pile of yarn that I don't know what to do with, right? So it sucks, but it is definitely a mistake that I make all the time. Another one that I make is relying a lot on things being very, very clearly explained to me and being very hesitant to make mistakes. This is a big one because I don't think it's a healthy lifestyle skill. We hear all the time that to live is to make mistakes, and to be successful includes like the repetitive getting up after a mistake and like figuring out where to go from there. And I agree. I think like positive, resilient people tend to be good at like recovering from failure. And for me, I am very problem-solving averse. Like, not that I can't problem solve, but if there is a way for me to avoid problem solving, I will. Again, comes back to the like looking for tutorials, looking for like the easier option that I know is going to work, even though it may not be the most sophisticated answer. So for me, when it comes to something like, I don't know, making a project, and there's, let's say, like a technique for joining two pieces together, and it says like, look up this tutorial online and figure it out. Okay, if it says like, join these pieces together in this way, and then it'll explain it with words, I feel like I'm already disinclined to learn something new, and then, or like to learn a more advanced version of something that I feel like I can already do. Like if I could just slip stitch together, I would, or if I can just like mattress stitch together, I would. Well, let's say they want me to like Kitchener stitch it together, which I like the look of, but it's frustrating. And when you explain Kitchener stitch like in words, it's like really frustrating, right? It's a little bit easier to see it. And then I'm gonna like look up videos and I need it to be explained like exactly clearly. I don't know, again, if this is, I'm a beginner and so I don't wanna make mistakes, because if I make mistakes, I don't know how to fix them. I don't know if it's because I'm impatient and it's easier to watch a video than it is to read. I don't know what it is, but it definitely has held me back a little bit. I feel like, again, this is probably why I don't make new things, is because I'm always so scared of like making mistakes. I'm scared of kind of making a mistake and then not knowing how to fix it. So I just like frog the whole thing. That has been my process resolution for a long time. And it's not helpful. It's not helpful because I never learned how to fix my problems. I mean, I am slowly, right? I'm getting a lot better at reading stitches. I'm getting a lot better at like knowing how to undo kind of complicated ones. That's where I feel like it's frustrating. It's like if you do lace and you need to unpick, but then like some of the rows get all janky. Short rows is another one that's like confusing for me to like undo. And it's hard, and it's one of those things where no one is like putting a gun to your head saying like you need to knit and you need to knit properly, but you do kind of want to knit properly, because then otherwise like you won't be able to make your beautiful garments. And as far as I'm concerned, I am making great progress personally on, you know, challenging myself when I want to take the easy way out, because I know this is like a personality thing, but it is hard. I also forget to put in lifelines, so that is another one. Like I don't want a frog, but I do, and then I have to like go back and like add the stitches one by one because I forget to put in the lifeline. It is like a stupid, silly little thing I should just know how to do. And another mistake that I make is I don't know how to gauge swatch properly. Frequently I gauge swatch and I assume that the size will be a certain way, and it ends up not being that way. I think probably because my gauge swatches are too small. They are usually 4x4, but I've heard that like the best case scenario is actually like 10x10, so you can really see the weight and the drape and all that stuff. But then I get all paranoid about like not having enough yarn and then having to frog my swatch, and then like undoing the bind off is frustrating. So I definitely make the mistake of not only making the wrong gauge swatch, but also choosing sizes that are too big for me often. So far it's been okay because the oversized look is in, and I'm not making things like bralettes or, you know, like fitted garments where the whole point is for it to fit in a very particular way. You need to do it in that way. You know, and that's that's par for the course, I think, as a beginner to choose forgiving patterns. But yeah, the size is too big for me. Also throws off my yardage count. So it's just been a little bit like I kick myself in the foot. Usually I find out way too late. I'm halfway between a project and I don't want to like frog the whole thing and I don't want to start over. But I also, you know, am at risk of like not being able to do the design decisions that I wanted to do. So kind of put myself in between a rock and a hard place. The last two, in spite of hearing other people talk about them, I pick them up anyway. One is that, again, I don't weave in my ends properly, and I kind of procrastinate on weaving in ends, and sometimes I just don't. Especially if it's like on the inside of something and no one's gonna see it, I just won't. Like I have bags and socks where I just tuck the little tail on the inside, and maybe it bothers me, but no one else can see it on the outside. And I don't know if that's like I've heard people say don't do this, and I do it anyway. Another one that I hear people say don't do and do anyway is that I start projects too far into the season to the point where by the time they're done, they're not useful. So I am now experiencing this as we enter spring for realsies, and I have like winter stuff still on the needles. Granted, I think it'll be fine because I don't see myself being a huge summer knitter. I don't know. They are quite romantic and quite tempting, I will say. There are plenty of beautiful lace tank tops and t-shirts that are really, really elegant and calling for me. But for now, I have all these like sweaters and like accessories that I definitely won't use. Like I have these like ear warmers and like a beanie that I'm just not going to use in May. So yeah, the two options are either to frog those projects or to like keep them in hibernation until the fall again. And I don't want to do that because then I can't use the needles and I can't use the yarn and I can't use the bag and it's just sitting. So yeah, those are just silly little mistakes that I make. Oh, another one is winding my yarn too early. I know you're not supposed to do that because it can disform the twist of the yarn. And sometimes you just have a really bad grasp of your cue and you're like, yeah, I'm going to use this in a month, and then you don't. So plenty of bad habits to go around. Hopefully, you know, in 6 months, I won't make these anymore and I will be a much more learned fiber artist. But for now, these are my mistakes. I'm so eager and curious to hear yours. If you have any, if you make these, if you don't make these, share them down below, please. And with that being said, I am pretty much done with my mistakes. I'm sure I will think of more. If I can think of more, I will add them somewhere. And if not, hopefully this list is exhaustive. So with that being said, thank you for spending some time with me, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!